Well, hey there, DevCentral. It's Jason. It's John. It's that time to connect with you. Today is Tuesday. It's a little different day. Well, hey there, DevCentral. It's Jason. It's John. And Jason, it's good to see you, my friend. How's it going today, man?
Good to see you too, man. It's going well. It's it's morning. It's a little weird, but it's good.
It's morning, depending on where you are. You know, maybe it's morning, maybe it's afternoon, maybe it's nighttime. So it's good stuff, man. Good stuff. Well, hey, we've got a couple of people in the chat already, so it's good to hear from all of you. So Mr. Anshul K was like, hey, today I got a job offer from Zscaler for a software engineer. Hang on, hand clap. Congratulations, man. That's awesome. I'm glad some of the little videos and stuff were helpful. So you let us know what you need, man. We're all in this thing together. So great job. Great job. Looks like Josh is with us today. So hey there, Josh. And Surah is there. That's awesome. That's awesome. And then Shoaib. We were just talking a few minutes ago. I was like, man, I'm gonna mess up your name every time I say it. And so anyway, but he was like, hey, my name gets messed up multiple times every single day. So anyway, so I was like, well, let me be the first to mess it up today, right? So anyway.
Yeah. Hello, Miguel.
Miguel Angel Alvarado Zaragoza.
Yeah, saludos.
All right, man. It's good to see you. Good to see you. All right, well, Jason, I got one for you today, man. We're going to get into we're going to do a live lab with the hero of all heroes, Mr. Tyler Hatton out of Worldwide Technology, where we're going to talk about NGINX and automation and Kubernetes and ingress stuff. And like, what is all that stuff, you know? Well, you're going to know here in a couple of hours.
Right.
But hang on. But I thought about this one really quick before we get going. Uh-oh. Today is Tuesday. It's an off day for our, DevCentral Connects because we normally do Thursday. So in the Wagnon house, Tuesday has become Taco Tuesday, which it is at many houses around the world, right? It's Taco Tuesday. And then that's where my mind went to like, okay, if it's Taco Tuesday, we need to talk about Taco Bell for a minute. And then my mind went to the place of what's the craziest menu item or what's your favorite menu item at Taco Bell? And I'll just say something really quick and then I'll let you say your whatever you think. But I looked up on the Google on the Googles a little bit ago. And apparently there was this Kit Kat quesadilla that they had on their menu at one point, which I thought was, I don't know, amazing and horrendous at the same time. Kit Kat quesadilla. I feel like there's a lot of, you take a tortilla of something, and you put some kind of meat in it, you put a little bit of sauce and you put some cheese. And that's it. And then you do that in about 5,000 different ways, But anyway, but there you go.
I think if it's got Kit Kats in it, right? Don't we need to switch over to French and have a crepe?
Oh, that's
rather than, add a little bit more sugar to that tortilla,
little cinnamon sprinkle,
maybe a little less flour.
Less flour. That's right. So
for me, I went through with my daughter, picked her up from the bus station on Thursday. We went down to the Huntsville Rocket Center for the weekend to celebrate my toddler's third birthday. And anyway, I picked up my daughter from the bus station in downtown St. Louis, and on the way back to the house, she wanted to go through Taco Bell, and she ordered something. I've never heard this thing before, the quesalupa.
Quesalupa.
It's like, and I don't know, is that like a real term or are they just like making stuff up?
They've got to create the new terms now. You can't just say quesadilla anymore or burrito. Yeah. It's quesalupa.
Like quesarita, quesalupa.
Yeah.
It's like they have like a random name generator that somebody coded up and just like
I feel like it is a random name generator, but it only contains a subset of about 5, starting words. There's queso and chalupa and burrito and quesadilla.
That's right. And it's got to roll off the tongue too.
It has to roll. There has to be the rolling R. Quesarita, right. Whatever. Good to go, man. All right. Well, so that's, for those that need to have a little lunch after this, want to swing by the Taco Bell and make a run for the border, pick up one of those Kit Kat quesadillas, hey, no one's going to blame you. No one's going to stop you. So,
right.
We, in fact, we would clap for you like we did for Anshul just a minute ago, where he got his job. New software engineer. Good to go. Well, hey man, so today we got a treat. We got a live lab with Worldwide Technologies. We've done this a couple of times, and we get to do it again today. We just keep learning more stuff, right?
I know. Yeah, we started with Terraform back in December, and then in February we did Ansible, and today, we're gonna dig into some modern apps and microservices. How do you secure those with NGINX? So, should we do this?
We should. Let's bring him on.
All right. Tyler Hatton, the hero of us all. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well, and I don't know if I can live up to that hype. Heroes of heroes or hero of heroes. That's a lot of hype right there. I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah. So Tyler, just to put it in perspective, we all have our heroes in life, and if we ask those heroes who their hero is, they say Tyler Hatton. So just to clarify,
straight to the heart.
There you go, man. There you go. You're looking.
So I have a question for you. Your background looks awesome. Your lighting, is that like an actual background, or you got some fancy LED splashes going on back there?
We're getting fancy here. We're doing LED splashes now. I used to have a green screen, and it looked all right. But I asked a couple people, and you're like, yeah, you don't want to do that whole key thing. You want to have some nice fancy LEDs in the background. So yeah, we're getting a little bit fancy here. I'm trying my best on my low budget.
Yeah, I don't know if I could reach. I'm going to go off screen for a second.
Oh, Jason, we just lost Jason off the screen for a quick second.
Yeah, I'm experimenting. I'm like doing like this LED light tube thing that I'm working on right now. So,
oh man,
that's
also
cool.
Maybe doing a little bit of light splashing around.
Nice.
So.
Jason, that kind of looks like the weapon of a Jedi Knight. The light.
It just might be. Yeah. So it's dual purpose. I can light my live streams, and then I can play with the toddler afterwards.
There you go, man. Yeah.
But funny story. I did build a lightsaber with my older son last summer. Yeah. We went to a class and we each built a lightsaber. I'll bring that on live stream someday.
You should.
I don't know where that is, but I custom built the hilt with out of PVC and then we had the like super high power LED that you have to drive with your electronics and got to like wrap it pretty well or it'll melt your PVC because it gets really hot. And so
dang, note to self, wrap that stuff. Does it make the little zoom kind of?
The first one I built does not have the sound in
audio.
But the next one I build, I do want to have the sound, but also the accelerometer to be able to customize when the sound plays, and if it bangs, it has a sensor to do the different sounds. So that's awesome. The next one I build. I want to go all in.
Yeah, you just need to find some guy named Anakin that's going to turn into Darth Vader, and then you can challenge him to a fight.
That would not go well for me. I do not have super great reflexes. So
that's awesome.
I was going to ask where
did the Force
toddler
pistols
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can handle the toddler. Much past that, I don't really have a chance.
I love it. Well, Tyler, here we are today, man. We get to do another live lab, and we've done these a couple of times. But for those that have not been with us before, on like the Ansible, the Terraform, which by the way, if you haven't seen those, go back and watch them. They're on our DevCentral YouTube channel. But today we get to build some modern, application stuff, right? Use some NGINX and all kind of good stuff.
Yes, we are. Yeah, that title for that lab is quite a few words, isn't it? But yeah, what we're going to basically go through today is a little bit of NGINX. So kind of talk about some of the key features of NGINX and how can you apply that to really kind of managing the access and protect different APIs and microservices that you have in your environment. So should be exciting. We have a whole on-demand lab. We're going to go through the whole thing. Hopefully, if we have time. I'm terrible at time management, but we'll go through the whole thing and step by step kind of walk through. What's the process of deploying a microservice, but how do you kind of protect it and kind of load balance a little bit of that with NGINX Plus?
Yep, gotcha. Awesome, man. Hey, really quick before we hop into that, I just saw a little chat come in. Hill Win. Where is country accent John Nash guy from? I don't know what that means. Maybe he means me, John Wagnon. But I was born and raised in a state called Arkansas in the United States. So if you're familiar with that, so that's where the little accent. It's kind of in the South in the United States. I assume that's what that got me. So he'll win. There you go, man. For the win. So good to go. All right. I did not mean to derail. So Tyler, we got some good, got a couple of slides to show, and then we'll hop into the lab, right?
Yeah. So, let's do this thing. Let's kick this off.
Bring up your screen there, and we'll get rocking and rolling.
It's beautiful. All right, perfect. So I know Jason has dropped the link in the chat. At least I believe it was Jason. But as we mentioned, for the folks that haven't registered yet, yes, thank you. It's up again. But go to wwt.com/register. You will need an account to access our on-demand lab today. Usually what we tell folks is it's preferred that you register with a work email. And the whole reason why we say that is if you register with a Gmail, you have to go through kind of like an approval process and that whole thing. So it's a lot easier if you register with a work email, so we can quickly get you into that lab with hopefully as little hurdles as possible. So yeah, register for an account, give that a shot. And just really quick, I'll bring it up right now. As I mentioned, and I believe the link was within the chat earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to launch an on-demand lab around this whole NGINX setup that we're going to go through. And in order to launch this lab, and I'll go through this twice, so if you miss this and you're still registering, don't worry, I'll go through it again in a couple minutes. But in order to get access to this lab, what you're going to want to do is on this website, assuming you're logged in. If you're not, there should be a login link at the top right, or a register link if you need to register. But what I'm going to do is in this top right, I'm going to click this magnifying glass, and I'm going to search for NGINX. Imagine that. And what you'll see is basically all the different content that we have on our website, WWT.com, around NGINX. And we actually have quite a bit of content around NGINX today. It kind of amazes me sometimes. But on the left-hand side, what you want to do, and what I'll do, is I'm just going to filter on lab or labs. And what you'll see is basically all the different labs that we have around NGINX today. So the thing I kind of want to preface with all this is the lab that we're going to go through today is very simple from an NGINX standpoint. It just kind of shows a little bit of the basics. It's kind of like that first step in the journey, that kind of crawl phase. But we have labs around applying GitOps. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Creating a CI/CD pipeline around managing NGINX. Those are certainly more advanced use cases that you can certainly go to later on and kind of apply to managing NGINX within your own environment. So, as I mentioned, we have a ton of content around NGINX, and this lab that we're going through today is just one of a couple that we have listed out here. And for the lab that we're going to access, the one that we care about is this one called Secure Modern Apps and Microservices with NGINX. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but you're going to want to click on that when you're launching it. And then what I'm going to do is you can scroll through this and read about the lab, but I'm not much of a reader. I don't read that stuff. So I'm just going to click Launch Lab right here. And what that will do, and what's really cool about this platform, is it will instantiate a unique instance of this NGINX lab with a Kubernetes cluster, an NGINX Plus instance, an API gateway, all this stuff. It instantiates that, and it's unique to you. And in order to access this lab, I'm just going to click this View Labs link down here. I've launched this lab a couple times, but what you should see is just a single one called Secure Modern Apps, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But you're going to want to click that Access Lab button and click on Open in ATC Gateway. And I always think this is the coolest thing to show because it all works through your browser. You don't have to RDP into anything. You don't need to SSH into anything. The whole access is within this browser session right here. And as you can see, I have like this whole RDP session right here that I can use to interact with this lab environment with a lab guide on the left-hand side. And this is what we're going to walk through today. So this is the content, but I kind of wanted just to walk through this a little bit so everybody can see the steps. And again, in a couple minutes, probably like 5 minutes from now, I'll go through it again really quickly. So for the folks who are still registering or getting access, they can go through this process. So cool.
Nice.
And then one final thing I'll just say here before we switch things back over and kind of talk about the agenda for today is I'll say it's a little bit easier to use Chrome when interacting with this lab environment versus Firefox. And the reason why I say that is we have this copy and paste capability that only seems to work in Chrome right now for this like guacamole session we have on the right. So when you access this lab, you'll see something like this. Assuming it pops up, there we go. Where it's going to ask, hey, do you allow this website to access your clipboard? And just click allow. And what that'll allow you to do is basically copy and paste content from like this lab guide into your RDP session right here. So give that a shot.
And Tyler, that has been a critical thing in the past. Because some of these files or commands or whatever, they get really long and tedious, and the syntax has to be just so. So if you can just copy and paste it, man, that is such a helpful thing, right?
Yeah, it's certainly.
I disagree. I like to type everything because it just builds that muscle memory and helps me remember stuff by actually typing it. If I copy and paste, it flies out of my very aging brain pretty quickly. So
Jason, I don't remember stuff anyway, so I have just kind of come to that realization, and I'm like, well, then let's just make it easy,
Yeah.
So
You've given up.
To each his own. Whatever floats your proverbial boat. So good to go.
Whatever works for you. I think more than anything, how I learn things is by going through the same lab multiple times. And the other way I learn is I like to break things. I think there's no better way to learn than to actually like break something and then figure out what went wrong. Maybe it's an old sysadmin mindset. I don't know, but that's how I learn things more than anything.
Or better, have somebody else break it, and then you actually have to figure out. Wait, I didn't break this, but it's broken. How do I get it back to where it was?
So
awesome.
It's funny. I have stories around that. So when we used to do interviews internally within Worldwide, we'd have this thing called the Gauntlet. And it was basically this broken environment that we would basically hand over to people that would interview with us. And they'd have to fix different components of that lab. But yeah, it's kind of like a gauntlet. Wow. You hand that broken lab environment to them. Like, there you go fix it.
Yeah. The first thing you do is
a great way. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great thing. I was just saying, the first thing you do is you turn it off, you turn it on.
Yeah.
Have you
have your routing protocols flapping for hours? Yeah.
Yes.
Good to go.
Cool. So again, get registered. For the folks that are having problems launching that lab, it might say like request access instead of launch lab. For the folks who are watching this live, reach out to the chat. We have a couple folks in there right now that are supporting this whole thing. They're happy to help out, answer any questions, and hopefully figure out things for you. But there we go.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is if you get stuck along the way and for whatever reason, they have access, not just all day, but anytime, right? We're doing the lab live here, but they can do that lab anytime.
Exactly. So these on-demand labs, let's actually look. So looks like we only have it running for a day, but yeah, to your point, you could go back here anytime, literally 6 months from now, because the lab will likely still be around. It might be updated, but it'll still be around and launch it again. So to my earlier point around, learning and kind of doing the same thing over and over again to get muscle memory and of course breaking things. That's one way you could do it is, maybe you try it today and then maybe you're doing some work with NGINX 3 months from now and you want to get more familiar with it again. You could absolutely go into this lab and relaunch it if you wanted to.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Okay. I have too many buttons in front of me right now. I'm getting a little confused, but What we're going to do is, as everybody gets registered, I'm just going to talk about two different things before we go into the lab, so everybody again can get registered for it. But overall high-level agenda of what we're going to cover today, I kind of broke it down into 4 different pieces. So the first thing that we're going to cover today is really what's the process of deploying an application, or really a group of microservices that make an application into a Kubernetes environment. And the thing I'll say about this section is, if you've never worked with Kubernetes before, and you're brand new to Kubernetes, you're intimidated by the word Kubernetes, which I certainly was at one point in time, don't worry about it. The whole plan for today is we'll go through some of the basic concepts of Kubernetes, kind of touch the surface of understanding at a very, very high level, but all the commands that you'll need, all the operational functions within Kubernetes we'll certainly talk about, and they're given to you. So no Kubernetes expertise is needed here. I promise. That's my one promise for today. Maybe one of many. We'll see. But you don't have to understand Kubernetes. The second thing we're going to talk about is really the NGINX plus ingress controller. So really talk about what is an ingress? What's the role that it plays inside of a Kubernetes environment? Why do you need an ingress? And then maybe why should you use NGINX plus as your ingress or your ingress controller into your Kubernetes environment? And we'll talk about those different terms. I'll certainly talk about what an ingress is. So if you're wondering what the heck does that term mean, we'll talk about that. The third thing we'll talk about is NGINX App Protect, which is something I'm a little bit excited about. But once we have our microservices deployed, how do we protect them from attacks from the outside? So things like cross-site scripting and maybe cross-site request forgery. And how do we? I always try to prevent myself from saying this, but how do we prevent the bad guys from breaking our applications and doing malicious things on them? So we'll certainly look at NGINX App Protect. How do you deploy that? How do you configure it, at least from a Kubernetes standpoint? And then finally, the thing we'll hit on is NGINX plus API gateway. So what is an API gateway? Why do you need one? We'll talk about that quite a bit, and then we'll actually deploy the API gateway within our lab environment and go through the process of kind of exposing one of our APIs within the lab using the API gateway. So that's the plan for today. So if you're interested in any of these things, definitely sit tight, because we're definitely going to cover them.
Tyler, that's John, a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, John, we did Zero Trust a couple of weeks ago, and that API gateway. I'm excited to see that aspect of your environment, because when we look through the stats, it's like 50%, maybe it was somewhere around 50% that had no credentials on their APIs at all, and so it's like, well, it's in my environment, I don't need to really worry about that. I was like, yeah, you do, and you should, and please let me know what your apps are so I don't use them. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, I may or may not have used to work with an organization like that, so I get that mindset. Luckily, all the APIs are authenticated today, but I get that mindset. It's a mindset of, if you're in our internal network, you must be secure, or we trust you, so you can access our APIs. Yeah, that doesn't really fly.
Yeah,
which is the whole point of Zero Trust.
Right.
Yep.
Cool. All right, and then one final thing before we go into the labs, and this is my plug of the day. This is my timeshare speech more than anything. So we're going to be at F5 Agility in 2 weeks. I think it's in 2 weeks, which is crazy. It's coming up
today. Yep.
But as I mentioned earlier, the lab that we're going to cover today is really part of a series. So we're going to, at F5 Agility, we're going to cover the next lab as part of that series, which is around kind of API security with NGINX using kind of GitOps practices. And for the folks that aren't familiar with what GitOps is, it's kind of one of those emerging buzzwords that I think I'd heard at KubeCon for the first time 2 or 3 years ago, and now everybody's using the term now. But it's kind of like an infrastructure as code approach with a little bit of kind of Git practices around it too. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a lab around that and managing NGINX and API and the API gateway using GitOps practices. So take a look at that. If you're going to be at Agility, I think it's free, so you don't have a lot of excuses. Take a look at our lab. We'd be happy if you joined us. And then the final thing I'll add here is we also have a lab around the F5 201 exam. So I know there's a lot of popularity around certifications today. And I know F5 certifications, some of them in particular, actually can be very challenging, speaking from experience. But we have one around the F5 201 certification. It's a great cert to get. And what I would say, if you're looking to learn a little bit extra about F5, or maybe you have somebody who's kind of new to F5 within your team, definitely check out that lab. F5 201 exam. It's not a very challenging one, but it's certainly one that kind of creates a good foundation of F5 knowledge that I think any F5 administrator should have, or anybody that's kind of new to F5. So definitely take a look at that lab. Highly encourage it. And we certainly have other labs on our website too around the different F5 certifications if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, take a look at our labs.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, there's always interest in labs at Agility. It's one of the highlights of the conference every year. And the certification is another big highlight. So, man, that's getting the best of both worlds right there, Tyler.
And Tyler's correct. Agility is free, and you do not have any excuse. So
no excuse.
I don't care what your boss is telling you that you have to blah, 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 blah. You need to sign up for Agility. You need to be there. You need to attend Tyler's labs, as well as the other fine labs that we'll have at Agility this year.
Good
Absolutely. Stuff. Cool. So I'm going to assume that everybody is registered at this point. I'm hoping.
Nice. I think it's been a good, moment of registration there for the past few minutes.
Let's give it a shot. So what we're going to want to do, and I'm going to go through these steps again one more time to launch the lab, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but very similar to what I did earlier. I just get on this website, make sure you're logged in. You probably will. Well, I see my picture here, but you might see something else, like, I don't know, like an empty picture thing, but it won't say login or register there. And using our wonderful search in the top right, you're going to want to search for NGINX. I lost my search. There we go. And as I mentioned earlier, it just basically displays all the content that we have around NGINX today. And to get to the lab that we want to access, there's two different ways you can do it. You could just click on this Secure Modern Apps and Microservices with NGINX square thing right here, or you could just filter on the labs and then find it that way too. But yeah, it's a Secure Modern Apps one. That's the one you want. I know there's a couple other NGINX labs that are there, but I just want to make sure people aren't confused as we go through this. And what we're going to want to do is, if everything is working on your side, what you should see if you're logged in is a Launch Lab button. And if you don't see this button, if it says like Request Access, what I would do is, if you're watching this live session now, reach out to us in the chat. We can help get you access. But if you're watching the recorded session, just click on the button that will also link you up with an engineer on our side that will get you access to that lab. It's just you'll have to go through an additional hoop than what we're going through right now, which is, it kind of stinks, but it's worth it. So I'm going to click this Launch Lab button right here, and it'll spin a little bit. And if everything is working, we should see the success little pop up in the bottom right. And what we're going to do is we're just going to click on View Labs right there. And what it will list out again is basically all the different instances that you have launched from a lab standpoint. In my case, as you can see, I absolutely adore this NGINX lab, so I've launched it 4 times now. So but I'm going to click the top one. Again, you should only see one of them, but if you want to launch 4 instances, you can. I'm not going to stop you, that's for sure. And what we're going to do is once we click that Access Lab button that's on the right-hand side of that square, I'm just going to click Open in ATC Lab Gateway. And what should happen is, again, that RDP session should pop up that will give you access to this lab environment, and it should hopefully work seamlessly. It's wonderful, except it's taking a sec. There we go. It logged me in. I'm like, don't break on me as I'm trying to hype this thing. But something that's kind of nice, if you have multiple monitors on your screen, something that I like to do is I often like to point out to folks is at the bottom, you kind of see this little pop out button. I don't know a better way to describe it, but you'll see that like the bottom on the left-hand side at the bottom of the lab guide, it's like a traditional like pop out button. If you click that, what's really cool is it'll actually open the lab guide up into a different tab, and you can, of course, move that to a different monitor if you want to, or just have it open in a different tab. That might make the lab guide a little bit easier. You can certainly see the screenshots a little bit easier if you do that, but you can try that if you want. What I'll probably do is I'm going to keep it open on the left-hand side so I can easily go back and forth. But just pointing that out so you can try that on your side. And yeah, so to get this lab guide started, I'm going to click this introduction link at the top. So we get a nice little introduction here. And what this is going to go through is, getting access. We've already done that. A lab topology diagram, which I'm going to actually keep open if I can. Open image, a new tab. Is that it? Yeah, there we go. But what this kind of lays out is all the different pieces that we're going to build out as part of this lab environment as we go through these different steps. So spinning up the NGINX controller, spinning up our services that we have kind of laid out here. Our API gateway will configure, and we'll also do some configurations on the NGINX controller. So it gives you a nice little high-level lab diagram of what we're going to do. And what I'll try to do is, as we go through these different steps, kind of point back at this diagram and be like, hey, for this step, we're configuring this part, like the ingress controller, and this is the place that it plays. I was thinking to myself last night, like, whenever you're demoing a lab, it almost feels like you're kind of like Bob Ross, where like you're painting different pictures of the landscape. And I kind of view like, when you configure the ingress controller, you're kind of painting the happy trees like that. I know I'm going crazy there, but that's kind of what I was thinking last night. But
Tyler, it's never wrong to get crazy like Bob Ross. And I feel like we could call them happy ingress controllers or happy clusters,
Exactly. Maybe I should grow like an afro like Bob Ross. Maybe
you definitely should. Stop. Hey, Tyler, stop thinking about it. Just grow the afro,
Just do it. Yeah.
Just do it.
Afro.
I have some envy. I have some afro envy.
Grow the fro, man. Little hashtag.
But just kind of going through this really quick. You can read about all the different pieces of this lab. But honestly, the part that's most important, and I think we do a good job of referencing the labs in multiple different places, is referencing this in the lab guide in multiple different places, I should say, is the credentials that access to different components of the lab environment. So, but if you're looking for the username and password to access like the Kubernetes master, it's master. So a lot of these passwords aren't very creative. Username and passwords aren't creative, but we have it listed out here where if at some point maybe you need those credentials, they're right here and you can easily get to them.
I feel like, Tyler, in lab environments, credentials are never very creative. It's admin. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like on Spaceballs, the combination for the luggage.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
So anyway, I digress. I'm sorry.
No, we're a very creative crew here. Very basic passwords.
Yeah, but there's two mindsets on that. It's like one, it's like you practice, practice like you play, which would be okay. Now we have to have like super complex passphrases. But the other hand is when you're working in lab environment all the time, it's just nice to get it out in a few clicks of the buttons and not have to worry about those super complex passwords. But then, by using the simple stuff, you build in bad habits. I don't know. It's the tension there. It kills me.
Man. Yeah.
Oops. There we go. But I think this is everything here. I always forget to show this, but to navigate this thing, there's multiple different ways to do it. But one way, especially as you get to the bottom of these pages, just click the next button here, and it'll bring you to the next page. And if you ever get lost, at the top left, there's a little hamburger button, which is like my favorite named button, the hamburger button. Yes. And you can easily navigate the lab guide that way. So there you go. Very easy. Okay. So now we actually are going to do some things. So very first step of this lab, what we're going to do is we're I kind of want to make this bigger. Can I make this bigger? That'll work. What we're going to do is basically deploy this Arcadia Finance application. And what this is just a demo application that I believe some engineers at F5 had built around a year ago to kind of demonstrate the different capabilities that are built into NGINX Plus and F5. So it's kind of a cool demo app. It's kind of pretty. But the thing to kind of realize about this application is it's broken down into multiple different microservices. So as we deploy this application, and I'll kind of show the pieces of deploying it in a moment, but recognize that it's not just one service. It's not just one kind of API. It's multiple different microservices, multiple different components that all serve their own purpose to make a larger application. And to that point, one of the things that's really cool about this application is it's what's often called loosely coupled, where you can actually like turn off one of the features, like I don't know, refer a friend, like break it, as I talked about earlier, and turn off that component, and the application as a whole will continue to run. The refer a friend piece won't work, but the larger application, this kind of Arcadia finance page, will work. And that's, just speaking at a very high level for the folks that are new to microservices. That's one of the key reasons why folks go down the path of microservices. It makes it more kind of fault tolerant. If you have one of the components break, the larger application still works. You just have a certain feature that isn't working. So that's what we're going to deploy here. And to deploy this application, what we're going to want to do, just as a very first step, and I'm going to shrink this back down again so I can easily access my remote desktop session. And by the way, should I make this bigger, guys, or can you read this? Should I ask that?
Oh, the left-hand side stuff?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a touch small. Let me look.
I can read it. I got a 10-inch monitor, so
yeah,
it's not bad if it's not across the room.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll go with this. I think it's all right. We're on YouTube. We're not presenting on our projector, so I think we're all right. Oh, yeah. But what we're going to want to do is we're just going to open up Empty Putty. I don't know how to say that. I don't use this tool, but what this is basically a terminal emulator that we have on our local system to access basically the master node of our Kubernetes environment. And to access that, if you look at the bottom taskbar, just click on that green button, and that'll open up this Empty Putty solution. And what we care about is on the left-hand side, and it's called K8's master node. And it's funny, John and I were talking about this earlier, but anytime you see the word K8, that is Kubernetes. So basically, that 8 stands for the 8 letters between the K and the S in Kubernetes. So at least that's what I think it stands for.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. You'll see K8s all the time, or pronounce it Kates. And then, Tyler, we were talking about this too. How do you pronounce some of these things? And I feel like in computer terminology or whatever, there's all these terms that people just argue about. It's like, I'm going to say K8s, and it's like, no, it's Kates. And I'm going to say Kates, and it's like, no, it's K8s. I think it's fascinating too that Kubernetes, or the people surrounding it, were like, I cannot be bothered with saying the word Kubernetes. It's too much. It's too much for me. So I'm going to take the Uberneti part of that word and just blow it up and just put an 8 in there. So there's 8 letters that we don't know what. If all you had was the number 8, you wouldn't have any idea it was Uberneti that stood for. But there it is.
If it's good enough for IPv6, it's good enough for Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
Shrink all those middle octets that are not filled with anything.
Colon, yeah. Colon. They should have called it K, colon. Yes, or just whatever. But they're not all zeros, I guess, so they couldn't do that. So
just you wait. There's going to be a distribution of Kubernetes, and they'll call it that for you. So there you go.
But then you're going to have to call it K, colon. And I feel at that point, that's just as long as saying Kubernetes or whatever. So who knows? It's crazy world.
Yeah. I remember in our previous conversation, like the biggest one is like GIF and GIF. Like you'll have technically illiterate people that will fairly technically illiterate people that will even argue about that. Like, come on, like give me a break, guys.
I mean, people will die on that hill, on the GIF hill. That is
Yeah.
That is the sword that they will fall on.
Or you try and apply a sysadmin context in the musical world, like the band Stained. For the longest time, I called it Stain D, and nobody ever corrected me until one musical guy's like, "What are you talking about? It's Stained." But it's like I didn't know the band really, but every time it'd come up, it's like, "Oh, Stain D."
Stain D, yeah.
You've been spending too much time. You've been spending too much time managing systems. Like that's yeah.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I still can't type the word serve. I can't every single time in server.
I do the same thing. Yeah. And use and user. That's the other one. Oh, it's terrible. I'm kidding. I do that all the time. It's terrible.
Yeah. My fingers are way ahead of my brain. It's just boom.
Yeah. The struggle is real, fellas. It's real.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. All right.
That's good. Hey, I wanted to point out really quick that empty putty up there at the kind of the top of it, it says multi-tabbed putty. So
I just can't read. There you go.
That's what MT stands for. Because I was thinking, is it some kind of like something terminal or something? No, it's multi. So you can have a bunch of tabs open at the same time.
So it's like a wrapper on original putty, right? That's
Yeah.
So it's just, it's putty. That's what it is. It's just you can have more than one putty tab open at a time. Everything's getting tabbed these days.
It's true.
Yeah. True. So anyway, there we go.
Yeah. Or you could use a real operating system and not did I say that?
Hey, Windows Subsystem for Linux, for the folks that haven't checked it out, is amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and have you seen the VS Code integrations? Like you can be in your Ubuntu subsystem and just type code from there, and it automatically opens you up in the directory. It's good stuff. So I hate on Windows, but it's come a long way since XP and 03. Yeah.
NT, which stands, they say NT stood for nice try, Anyway, sorry about that, Tyler. We kind of took a little detour.
No worries at all. Partially my fault, but So for the folks to get access to this Kate's master node, what we're going to want to do is just click on Kate's master node or double click on it. And what that will do is basically log you into kind of a Linux command line that we're going to use to configure our Kubernetes environment. We're in that command line, and I'll talk about where we're at in that. But it kind of a good first step just when kind of feeling out, okay, what makes up this Kubernetes environment? Do I have access to Kubernetes in the first place? Is to run this kubectl or kubectl or kubecontrol. That's another one that people call a billion different things, and you're going to offend somebody. But a good command to run is this kubectl. That's what I'm going to say right now, but I bet I changed it.
Just pick one and go with it.
Yeah, nodes.
Just got to do it. You got to own it.
And what it's going to list out is basically the different nodes that are a part of our Kubernetes cluster. So the way to kind of visualize this is when you talk about Kubernetes, this is really kind of a cluster of different systems or nodes working together to kind of deliver different applications and services to users and other applications around you. But when we run that kubectl get nodes, what we're seeing is basically this list that we see on the right hand side, the different machines that make up the cluster of this larger Kubernetes system. And for the folks that have never used Kubernetes before, there's basically two different types of nodes. There's our master, which is my pen didn't work there. Uh-oh.
The slide's getting ahead of you a little bit.
There you go. All right. But you have your master, right, which it kind of acts as kind of the control piece of your Kubernetes cluster. I almost think of it like a brain of Kubernetes. And that's what we're running our kubectl or our kubectl commands against to perform different configurations against our cluster. And then the second thing is we also have these things called worker nodes, and we have two of these within our cluster. And this is what's going to be running basically our NGINX nodes, our application that we're about to deploy. kind of the heavy lifting pieces of our Kubernetes cluster, the things that we're deploying, those are going to be deployed on those worker nodes. But again, holistically and looking at this as a whole, this makes up our cluster. In our case, it's a pretty small cluster. It's only 3 nodes with 1 master and 2 worker nodes. But I just kind of wanted to point that out as we ran that command to explain, okay, what the heck are we looking at when we run that get nodes command?
Okay.
Cool. So the next thing it asks us to do, and we'll talk about this in a moment, what this is giving us or what information it's giving us, but it's this command called kubectl get pods. And just to explain at a very high level, what pods are within Kubernetes are basically one or more closely related containers. So for the folks that have ever even heard the most minimum of Kubernetes, what it's called is a container orchestration platform. So it's about managing and orchestrating the management of containers across multiple different VMs or nodes in a cluster. And when we run this kubectl or kubectl get pods command, I'm going to keep doing that. Yeah. And what we're seeing is basically a list of kind of containers that are running on our Kubernetes cluster that kind of handle the administrative tasks on our system. So we haven't deployed anything yet, but what we're seeing right here are just kind of the base containers that make Kubernetes work, that provide kind of the underlying networking and proxying, of course, DNS services that are needed in order for Kubernetes to kind of operate as a cohesive system. But what we really care about here more than anything, and we'll talk about pods again a little bit later, but what we really care about here is just making sure that everything is in a ready state and a running state right here, which they are. So looking for 1.1 next to these different services and making sure that they're running. And this is just to check, hey, is our lab environment functional or not, which it is in our case. And I haven't ran into a lab environment where things are broken, so I think we're good. Cool. The next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to deploy our application. And I'll explain what's going on here in just a moment. But the way that you deploy your application is by running this kubectl apply -f, which means like dash file, and then the location of this YAML file, this arcadia-all.yaml. And I'm going to run this really quick, and I'll explain in a moment what's going on. But what's funny about this, right, is if I cat this out, and of course you can see it by the file extension, during the Ansible presentation a couple weeks ago, I joked about, if you don't like YAML with Ansible, well, guess what? Good luck getting away from it because it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
YAML will find you. It will find you. Like Liam, what was the dude's name in Taken? I will find
Liam Neeson. Yeah.
Right, Liam Neeson. Yeah.
I have a certain set of skills.
And YAML finding you is one of them. Right.
I have a certain set of skills, and writing good cohesive YAML is one of them. There you go.
There you go.
But what we're looking at is, and what we're deploying when we do, or what we're doing when we do an apply of that YAML file, is basically deploying what's called a Kubernetes manifest. And inside of this manifest is basically just a list of resources in YAML format that we want created inside of our Kubernetes environment. So we're basically telling Kubernetes, hey, here's a list of configurations that I want deployed in my environment, list out this very specific format. And going back to kind of our pods use case, if I can bring this up, there we go. As we mentioned, one of the things that we're deploying when we apply that manifest is basically a list of pods or a list of containers that make up the different microservices for our larger application. So if we look at our diagram here, assuming my pen will work, and what we had shown earlier inside of kind of that picture and list of different microservices that make up this application, what we're deploying when we apply that manifest is 4 different containers within our environment, within our Kubernetes cluster, that basically make up those different microservices that make up the larger application. So, and they're running on the worker nodes too. So that's what we're doing when we do a kind of a kubectl or a kubectl or a kube whatever apply. And as I mentioned, so these are what's known or what's called an YAML format, right? So you can't get away from YAML. But whenever you look at these different YAML files that make up these manifests, two key things you should always look at is basically the kind, which we have at the very top. So what type of resource do you want to create? In our case, maybe we want to create a pod, which is just a container or a grouping of containers. And then the second thing to kind of look for is, at least in this case for a pod, is what image, what type of container do you want to deploy in your environment? And for the folks that have never worked with Docker before, what this is basically is right here is what's called a Docker image or a container image. And this kind of lays out the basic constructs for spinning up an NGINX environment in this case. But this could be like Redis, it could be, I almost said DynamoDB, but MongoDB. It could be a list of different services. But going back to this idea of what are pods, it's just a grouping of containers. And that's what we're deploying whenever we deploy into our Kubernetes environment here using that YAML file. So you'll see a lot of YAML files today, but just kind of recognize all these is just definitions of objects that we're creating.
Cool.
And then the final thing I just kind of want to show here is what's actually happening when we deploy this Arcadia finance application into our environment. And instead of a pod, it uses something a little bit more complex called a deployment. And deployments are very similar to pods with some additional features. It's almost like a wrapper to a pod. So if we look down here, we see kind of very similar syntax or formatting that we saw a second ago with our NGINX server, where it says, here's the containers, and here's the image that you're going to use to spin up this Arcadia main app inside of Kubernetes. But it also adds a second piece here around like replicas. So in the case of deployments, what it's adding is a feature where maybe when we want to scale out the amount of main app microservices running inside of Kubernetes to be fault tolerant. So if you were to look at that YAML file and kind of dig into it, kind of what I showed earlier when I catted it out, what you'll see is deployments instead of pods. But recognize that all deployments are, if you're new to Kubernetes, is just a wrapper to pods. So just to create some clarification for the folks that might be taking a closer look at that. Cool. So that was a lot of explanation of that, but I just wanted to make sure that we kind of explain what was going on there when we actually applied this, because the lab guide doesn't really go into depth on how that works.
Mm-hmm.
But when I ran that
context is important, and that's why I like the live aspect of doing these labs, because you get the context and it, not just the how, but you also get the context of why you're doing it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's why I like presenting these things, because it certainly gives a lot more detail as to what's going on here, and banter, which makes it more fun. When I ran that apply command, again, all you're really seeing here is just a list of objects that were created inside of our Kubernetes environment. They're being dictated by that manifest. And what you should see is like created right here, and hopefully not an error. If you see an error, you have much bigger problems. But there we go. So we've created that. And if we run this kubectl get pods command again, and you can add that -a flag, but I'm not going to do that because I want it to be more filtered on these applications we just deployed. What you should see is basically, again, the different pods or containers that were deployed when we had ran that manifest just a moment ago. So as I mentioned earlier, when we were at the top of this page in the lab guide, this application in particular is made up of 4 different microservices, creatively named app2, app3, backend, and main. But what we're literally looking for here is just making sure these are in a 1.1 state, which they are, so we're good to go. And then just to add a little bit more detail here, we can also do a kubectl get deployment. So let's say, for example, that .apps, but let's say, for example, you were to increase the amount of nodes that you're running inside of your cluster, or the amount of nodes that the amount of replicas you're running. You would see this be like, I don't know, like 2/2 instead of 1/1 in our case. So kind of showing that too, just for the folks who are just trying to get your feet wet with Kubernetes. These are all kind of fundamental objects of Kubernetes, but it's cool to show these little things as we go through this. So we got that. Our application is deployed and running. We're good there. The next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to open up the Kubernetes console or GUI to just kind of see what it looks like and what these labs look like from that standpoint. And to do that, just click on the Chrome inside of your RDP session, and there should be a bookmark at the top called Kubernetes Dashboard. And we won't be spending too much time here. I'm just going to click skip here. But, I'm a command line guy, right? Everything I do is through command line. In fact, everything that we do in this lab is mostly through command line. But if you like that GUI, if you're just kind of curious about the different objects that you can create within Kubernetes, you can certainly go to this dashboard. It'll give you a nice little GUI where you can see the deployments that we just spun up for our microservices, and then kind of see the different types of objects that you can create within your Kubernetes environment using those manifests I showed just a second ago. So like cron jobs, for example, for like scheduled jobs, you can manage those using Kubernetes, which is really neat. But won't spend too much time in here, but if you like a GUI, if you want something pretty to show your boss, here you go. You got a nice little GUI here. But there you go. Cool.
Sometimes too, it's easier to find something in the GUI and say, okay, that's what I was looking for. And then, then you can either search for, sometimes the GUIs will have, hey, if you want to do this in the command line, this is how you do it. But, just having the GUI to kind of poke through, discover the breadth of everything. Because sometimes in the command line, like the discovery of all the functionality is a little hard. But if once you're already familiar with all those things, I'm definitely, command line first on that regard. But being able to do service discovery in the GUI I like that. I still do that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I'll say too about Kubernetes, if you look at the documentation, a lot of it's command line based. It's not GUI based, unfortunately, if that's your thing. So, but again, I like that point, Jason, because I agree with that. And I do this especially within Amazon. I might build something out in Terraform and like provision a resource within AWS. But often what I like to do just as a level of confidence is to go into the GUI, go into that management interface and verify, is it truly doing what it's supposed to be doing? Does it look like a real configuration or is something messed up here? So yeah, completely agree with that point. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to deploy our ingress controller here, or really deploy the NGINX component of this larger environment or application that we're building out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our terminal window here and, there we go. Clicking on the wrong window. I've got too many buttons in front of me. But what we're going to want to do is I'm just going to run this script here really quick. And actually, before I do that, I'll explain what the script does in a second. But let's actually look at what's in this script. Copy and paste is not on my side today. Copy. There we go. There we go. All right. I'll click here and click there. But if we look at this script, what it's basically doing is very similar to what we just did a second ago with that Arcadia-all, I think, .yaml file. It's just applying a list of manifests. It's a list of YAML files that contain those different objects that we're creating. In this case, in order to set up this thing that's called an ingress. And what I'm going to do right here, and I'll explain what an ingress is while this is running, is I'm going to paste this in and hit enter. And there we go. All right. And what I should see in front of me is a bunch of objects are being created to get this thing called an ingress working. But what the heck is an ingress? And why do you need one? That most importantly, what the heck does this word even mean? And really what the best way I kind of imagine an ingress is, think of your Kubernetes cluster. How's my pen? There we go. Think of a Kubernetes cluster almost like a building or like a walled off area it's kind of a fenced-in garden. What I mean by that is things that are external to your Kubernetes environment won't be able to access these pods directly unless you do some additional configurations. And that's the point of an ingress. It's almost like the front door to like your house, or like a gate into a fenced off area. Think of that as like an ingress. And what we're doing here when we deploy these different YAML files is we're basically setting up an NGINX Plus proxy to act as that front door to allow external users or applications to access the different applications that live inside of your Kubernetes environment. So it's like a proxy. It is a proxy. It's not like a proxy. It is a proxy. where you think about it, right? It's an important component of your larger Kubernetes environment, because most, if not almost all of your traffic, at least from an external standpoint, should be going through that front door. And that's, again, what we're configuring there. Now, the way that this works...
Can I say something about that real quick?
Yeah.
So and Kubernetes has that built in, right? The kube proxy that you could use. But the level of control that you have for your particular services is significantly reduced by using native kube proxy, because it kind of manages without much visibility that relationship of what's going on the inside. Whereas if you deploy your own ingress, whether it's NGINX for that ingress, or using like a big IP ingress controller, or the what they call it, CIS is the big IP version of that. Yep. Gives you port and IP level control that allows you to manage your pool members and stuff better. Yeah. Maybe exactly. I stole your thunder there, but no. Yeah, and to your point, right, there is this thing called kube proxy that exists within Kubernetes. In fact, earlier when we had ran... By the way, should I make this bigger, guys? I should have asked that. Is this maybe
really
a little bit bigger? The terminal window, maybe a little bit bigger, that font. I mean, I can read it, but yeah, I'm definitely having to squint a little bit.
Always forget to do that.
But I can read it.
Let's make this 18. That seems like a big one. All right. There you go. But if we look at our Kubernetes setup here, my stupid terminal isn't let me scroll to the bottom, but that's fine. If you look, we have multiple processes here called kube proxy. And yeah, Jason, to your point, this is like a native service to Kubernetes. And in fact, you can actually set up this thing called called a node port, or a node port service to the way I look at it is provide direct access to these pods from like an external client standpoint. Now, the way I kind of view node ports, it's almost like the back door, or like your patio, door into your house. Like it's not the front door, it's the back door. And do you want your guests to take the back door? Probably not. You want to show them all the bells and whistles, which is the whole point of the ingress. You want to show your front room and all that stuff. So that's why you use an ingress. And to your point, Jason, the value of having ingress is it adds a bunch of features that you aren't going to get with a node port. One of those is for node ports, it listens on like an ephemeral port by default. So above, it's a 3200 or 32,000, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Number. But but no, that's a great point. But yeah. Front door.
Well, I mean, maybe if you're doing something shady, you do want your guests coming in through the back door.
Exactly.
To catch what was that? The old 2020 episodes or whatever.
To catch a thief, or
to catch a
killer,
pervert or whatever. Those shows were. Yeah.
To catch a predator with Chris Hansen.
That's
he has
what
a new documentary on Netflix right now.
Yeah.
So back to that point. Ultimately, you want an ingress. It can be F5, it could be NGINX Plus. NGINX is a default one in many native Kubernetes environments. It can be many different things, but again, it acts as that front door to your Kubernetes environment, into the applications inside your Kubernetes environment. And as we set this up, the way that this kind of works is, you have your users coming in, and we have our ingress configuration, which we'll see in a second in YAML format. But that ingress configuration is mapped to what's called a service inside of our Kubernetes environment. So this is another type of resource that we're creating here. And more specifically, this is what's called a cluster IP service. And what this basically provides you in the world of Kubernetes is load balancing across those multiple replicas I talked about earlier. So in the case where maybe you're running multiple versions of this main app microservice, you don't want traffic to always go to the same node, or the same container. So we have this service right here that acts as like an internal load balancer to Kubernetes that our ingress maps to spread traffic across our different containers that live inside of it. So we'll see that in a second. The whole reason why I bring that up is as we look at the manifest files, or the YAML, which is so pretty to look at, we'll see references to those services. So there you go. All right. So what does it look like from a configuration standpoint if you were to open up one of those YAML files that we just deployed when we ran that install _ingress.sh? What does that look like? Hey, guess what? It's like every other Kubernetes manifest you've ever deployed. Not a lot of creativity there, but which is great because there shouldn't be any confusion as to what it does. But at the top right, what you're going to see is kind of that same kind syntax. You're going to see, what kind of object am I creating? I'm creating an ingress. I'm creating that front door. How do I want this configured? I'm going to have a list of rules that are associated with it. In my case, I have a specific host name that I want this ingress to listen on, but also route traffic specifically based on that host header that my clients are sending to me. In this case, it's this arcadia-finance.lab.local domain. And then inside of that, what's really cool is we can get very specific with the configurations of this ingress and say, hey, for this proxy, based on the URL path that I am getting, where do I want to send this? So in our case, going back to this idea of services, I'm saying, hey, if you're going to the root, so / go to the main service or the load balancer service, that cluster IP service that points to the main app group of replicas or containers that I'm running inside of my Kubernetes environment. And then, of course, hit it on port 80. That's what's happening there. And going very in depth here, hopefully not too in depth from a Kubernetes standpoint, but I really just wanted to explain just at a kind of a YAML level what's going on. Instead of just running that shell script, what the heck is it doing? Like that's important. And we'll see the result of this in just a moment when we access the website. And the final thing I'm just going to show here before we go back to the lab environment is there might be some Kubernetes experts that are watching this right now. And something they might ask is, well, the ingress object is really cool, but does it have its own CRDs or custom resource declarations that I can also apply for this NGINX Plus ingress controller? And yeah, absolutely. Big thing for the folks that aren't familiar with kind of CRDs is at the top you have this kind virtual server. This is something custom to NGINX, and you kind of see that with the API version at the top. But not going to go into this. We're not going to use these. But for the folks that again are familiar with Kubernetes, common question I hear all the time is, does this thing have its own CRDs? Because it gives you a little bit extra level of customization compared to the ingress historically. So just pointing that out, we're not going to focus on this, but yeah, if you're a Kubernetes person, here you go. There's your CRDs. All right. So going back to this lab environment, what we're going to do, we got sidetracked there, is I'm going to scroll down and kind of talks about this a little bit, gives us a documentation on if you want to install the NGINX ingress controller, NGINX Plus ingress controller in your environment. So if you want to get into that, you can certainly click on that link. And the next thing it's going to have us do, and I just ran this command, so except my terminal window is all messed up when I change the font size. There we go. All right. But what we should see, and I might have to run this again. It's actually one of my complaints about PuTTY is it doesn't fix the resolution quite right when you change things. But What you should see at the bottom is a new container or new pod that's deployed within our environment called NGINX Ingress. And that's that proxy, that's that front door that's deployed in our environment. And it's in a running state with 1/1 being the amount of replicas that we're running. So we don't have a lot of redundancy, so we're only running one replica, which is fine in our case in the lab environment. And you can list the different services if you want to, but honestly, what I think is kind of cool to see is if you do a kubectl or a kubectl or a kube whatever, get ingress, and what that will list out is basically the ingress objects that we have created inside of this Kubernetes environment. So that YAML I was showing earlier, this is the result of that. And what I can do here is if I do a kubectl describe ingress, and then I think it's called Arcadia. Yeah. And I'm doing tab completion, which you can do too, because we set this up on this machine. What I should see when I do a describe is basically those configurations that we just created from that manifest, but now they're in this kind of nice little Kubernetes, standard out format. And to my point that I made earlier, what we should see is kind of the routing information for this ingress, where we have our host name here, we have our paths, and these paths are each mapped to their own different services. So, root, again, was mapped to main, /files is mapped to backend, API to app2, so on and so forth. My whole point in showing this, right, is just to kind of, again, draw the connections both from a diagram standpoint, but also from just being a Kubernetes admin standpoint. How do I get this information and validate that it's working? And that's one way that you could do it, is just by doing some gets and describes of your Kubernetes environment. Cool. So now the fun part. Let's actually test this thing. Let's verify that it's working. And the way that you can do that is if you go to your Chrome browser again and just open up a tab off of Arcadia Finance, or you can just click on it. I'll just click on it. What you should see, if everything is working, which everything appears to be working for me, is basically the indexer, that microservice that we're accessing inside of our Kubernetes environment. So this page that we're looking at is actually hosted inside of Kubernetes, created using that manifest that we had just deployed. So we're good. Awesome. And what we're going to want to do is we want to log in, and that's on the right-hand side. And I'm going to log in as Matt, and his password is very creative. I love F5. Again, this is a F5 demo application.
That is a fantastic password.
It is. It is a fantastic password. It's better than password, I'll put it that way. But
awesome. Matt, I need to borrow $29,281.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
Just just a little heads up, thing, something to put in your brain.
So, what you should see on the screen is similar to this. What I will say is, I like this guy. This guy needs to make his portfolio a little bit more creative, right?
Yeah,
he has Amazon and Microsoft. F5 is fine, but he needs some meme stocks. He needs some GameStop and Nokia.
Where's GameStop?
AMC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So strong. Where's Tesla? Where's all that? Right.
Yeah. He needs some crypto. Yeah.
That's right.
Get with the times. Yeah. Get some Dogecoin. There you go. But this is what you should be seeing. And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't just one microservice that makes up this larger application. So if I were to do like a right click and inspect and look at the network traffic, what you would be seeing is it's actually calling multiple different paths that we had dictated inside of that ingress configuration. And what that's making up is like different sections of this page. Like, I don't know, the right-hand side, I can't remember which microservice it was, if it was app2 or app3. But the point is, if that microservice wasn't working, it wouldn't display this. It would show like a it's broken sort of thing. Like a under construction. There we go. We're going back to the mid-90s, an under construction icon.
Under pressure. Right.
Coming soon.
Yeah, coming soon. A little,
And it never comes.
Little mini files, GeoCities.
That's right.
Yes. We need to bring that back, by the way. I was thinking about that this morning.
Ding. Yep. That is kind of cool, though, how you talked about how it's loosely coupled. So if one little part breaks, it doesn't break the whole thing. I think that's a fascinating, fault-tolerant, point to make.
Yeah, we could spend a whole day talking about that. But 12-factor applications, loosely coupled microservices. A lot of organizations I work with struggle with that, to be honest. But good mindset to have. And this application, at least from that perspective, was kind of built with that mindset, which is awesome.
Josh has a couple extra recommendations here for Nortel and Kmart.
Yeah. Josh,
Blockbuster.
Sure. What would your stock portfolio balance be then, Josh?
Not that he did say he wished his balance looked a little more like that. Go out and buy some venture. It's like, do you remember the venture department store?
Wow.
So yeah, Jace, I'm sure you're aware of the venture sign on 270 right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Blast from the past.
Yeah, up there off of Florissant Road, was it?
Florissant? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. For the folks that are watching this and for reference, so I don't know how long Venture's been out of business, but off of one of the highways in the St. Louis area, I don't know what had happened, but basically a Venture sign has popped up. I think it was painted a long time ago and somehow it appeared again. But yeah, every time you drive by it, you see this Venture sign from 20 years ago. It's a blast from the past, put it that way.
Nice.
But okay, so what we're gonna do here, our application is working, but we're gonna kind of do like a pseudo cross-site scripting kind of test here. We just want to basically make sure that we're blocking script tags here, and I don't think cross-site scripting works for this application. It'd be awesome if it did, but what we're gonna do, because I don't know, I do an alert and show some pretty pictures, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna do put a URL argument here, basically saying A equals the script tag, and any WAF, any web application firewall should be able to catch this, because you should not have a script tag at that part of your request. And what we see right now is we don't have any protection, right? We were able to submit this GET request. Nothing blocked us. We're good or we're bad, depending on how you look at it. And we need to fix this. We don't want people to steal all of our, F5 stock or our Amazon stock, or, heck, buy venture stock for the heck of it, just to play a joke on you. So we need to fix that. And what we're going to do to fix that, and this one gives you another command, is we're going to deploy this thing called NGINX App Protect. And really what NGINX App Protect is this is I want to say recent, but it's probably been over a year at this point, but a recent module that the F5 and NGINX has created, which has kind of taken kind of the best of F5 Advanced WAF, but made it in a package that you can apply inside of your NGINX environment or to your NGINX proxy. So if you really like Advanced WAF, and you don't like ModSec, to be more specific, hey, guess what? You can now use kind of that App Protect functionality that exists within F5, but in NGINX. So to do that, and before we do that, I skipped a step. Before we do that, we're going to look at a couple of different pieces of data. So, again, nice things that you can show your boss, or if you like a GUI, there's nothing wrong with that. You can use this stuff. But as part of this deployment, we also deployed this NGINX Plus dashboard. And what this gives us is basically kind of like a nice little management interface that tells us about our NGINX environment that we have spun up here. But what I do think is really cool about this is if you look on the right-hand side, you look at this request counter right here, and you see that it's incrementing very quickly. And this isn't me. But one of the cool things about Kubernetes is it actually has its own health checks. So it has these things called readiness probes and liveliness probes, where in our case, it's actually sending an HTTP check against our NGINX instance or NGINX Plus instance within our environment to basically check, are you there? Are you there? Are you there? And it is. So that's what we're seeing there. But in real time, we can see that number increment just from, call it the I think of like the background radiation of Kubernetes, or just those health checks of it checking that were around. So that's kind of cool. And then the other thing that's really neat is as we had when we had deployed this NGINX Plus instance within our Kubernetes environment, we had it pointed to we had it pointed to, or I should say the other way around. We had Prometheus pointed at it to basically pull telemetry data from our NGINX Plus instance as traffic was created against this environment. So what we've done is we've basically graphed this out using this solution called Grafana, which is an incredibly popular dashboarding tool that a lot of folks use out there. I know when I worked in IT, or when I left IT, we had a lot of different teams that had like Grafana dashboards next to kind of their group of desks, and this was to again show, I think, the maybe the upper managers that, hey, we do things here. No, not to beat up on, no, but what's great about these dashboards though is and I remember this about our database team in particular, is you could tell when they were having a bad morning because you would see like a spike of red from like bad queries, from like things breaking in the morning. So that's what's really powerful with these dashboards, is if you don't have like a knock, for example, you can set up one of these dashboards and you can look at it. And when you come in the morning, if you see a lot of red, it's like, better take a closer look at this. And I used to do that a lot in IT. You'd be amazed that you can get out of these dashboards. But yeah, that's what we're doing here. It's just, it's giving us information around kind of the different requests that it's seeing. Is it an upstate? Amount of reloads that the actual pod has had, I believe. Actually, I could be wrong on that. But the network IO, basic information that you might need, or telemetry, in order to kind of assess, hey, is this working or not? Is this performing or not? Maybe put on that SRE hat. Is it meeting our, what do they call them? I can't remember now, but our goals from a performance and availability standpoint. So throwing that out there. All right. So pretty graphs, pretty dashboard. There you go. If you need that sort of thing, that makes you feel comfortable and happy, and parts of that certainly made me happy back in the day. You can use that.
Dashboards have come a long way since I was operational. I think, it would be 12 years ago. Cacti was kind of the big thing. And so, we had a bunch of cacti, but to look at where they are today versus where your dashboards were 12 years ago, they're certainly a lot prettier and management worthy. They were just as functional back then, but they certainly were not pretty.
Yeah, and what I will say is the big thing about Grafana, and I think the reason why it's taken off, is it's not that hard to configure. And there's a ton of content online and classes you can take around Grafana and Graphite and Prometheus and InfluxDB, all these different kind of services around gathering telemetry that you take. And of course, there's F5 telemetry streaming too, which is I think starting to take off out there. So if you're not doing this today, take a look at it. Trying to get a leg up against other folks on your team. Definitely create a dashboard. They're certainly impressive to show off. But okay, so we showed off the pretty stuff. We have our ingress configured. We have our front door configured. Let's actually get some security around this sort of thing, because again, it's our front door. Maybe we need to build a door lock on it, or maybe put a nicer door on that. I don't know. Talk about door analogies here, but we're going to do that. So what we want to do is I'm going to scroll down here. I think this just explains what NGINX App Protect is. So if you want a better description of what I just gave, read that. And what we're going to want to do is, we're already SSH into the master node, so we're good there. And we're already in that home directory, I believe. But what we want to do is, so this suggests you do a delete ingress, so to delete the existing configurations you just made. I'll be honest, I don't think you have to do this. So I'm going to take a risk here, and I'm going to skip this step. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But for the folks who are watching this, especially if this breaks, maybe you should follow this because it is in the lab guide. But I want to make a point here as to why I'm skipping this. But what it wants us to do after we delete that, again, skipping that step, this might blow up in my face. We'll find out. That'll be a lot of fun. But what we're going to want to do is basically run the second shell script here called install ingress _nap.sh. And let me cat this out too. Let me show what this is before we run it. But very similar to kind of the previous script we had ran just a moment ago. All it's really doing is just, again, installing a bunch of Kubernetes, or applying, I should say, a bunch of Kubernetes manifests using kind of the YAML format that we're now very familiar with, creating some additional objects that are specific to kind of the policies or security policies that we want to enforce when traffic passes through our NGINX Plus Ingress Controller proxy. So we're going to apply this. And I'll explain in a moment why I had skipped that previous step, because I think it's something that's kind of cool. And one of the things I actually love about Kubernetes. So we had all this stuff flash in front of us, and I didn't mention it earlier, but ignore the warnings. We need to fix that. In fact, .22 is coming up very soon. I think we just had 21 released on us. But one of the cool things about Kubernetes that I think is great, and we had talked about this a couple months ago when we talked about Ansible, so this is a little bit of a throwback, is Kubernetes manifest and Kubernetes in general has the concept of idempotency built into it. So in the case of like this cluster role, which ignore what that is, but next to it, we see like this unchanged message right there, whereas earlier it probably said changed. And what's really cool about Kubernetes, and whenever you do these manifest applies, is it's declarative, it's idempotent, and that if the configuration that you're pushing to that device is already there, it's going to know that, and it's going to move on. And it's going to realize my configuration hasn't changed at all. Versus if it's changed, which, let's see, this one should be changed, right? No. Where's the changed one? There we go. It's kind of hard to read, but it says configured. I guess instead of change, it says configured. Should have known that. But that's my point. Instead of unchanged unchanged, it's going to say configured. And it again goes back to that whole point of idempotency. Again, that's one of the coolest things about Kubernetes is it's very declarative. It tries to get you to that intended state that you're declaring through your Kubernetes manifest, very similar to Terraform and certainly to a certain extent Ansible. So calling that out, neat. And that's, by the way, why I didn't want to run that delete earlier is Kubernetes should be smart enough to figure that out. Now let's see if it breaks, which it might.
One of the things that I don't know what the intent is of the original article, but after they went through the series of security commands and said, whoa, we're not very secure. Maybe it was hey, maybe we unpublish this this ingress until we have security around it. Maybe that was the intent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and that's a very good point. I have a feeling we ran into problems there at some point, so that's why I'm hoping we don't run into problems now. But I show that, right, because it's a cool trick in Kubernetes. Yeah. It's one of the things I don't like to ignore. This is just checking if the pod is running. You know what? Let's run our kubectl command. Let's get a list of pods, and let's see if it's actually running. And would you look at that? Our ingress is running. So that's awesome. And it brings up, at least in the lab guide, you can look at the manifest. And for the folks who are watching this, if this is something you're seriously interested in and you're trying to figure out how you deploy this in your own environment, take a look at the manifest. It's a great example of how we got this working, and you can, of course, tweak it to your needs. But what we want to do now is we want to take the same request that we had made earlier and try it. Just give it a shot. I think I can do this. Hit enter. And what we should see, which is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the perspective that you have, is a very similar error that I'm sure some of you have seen with ASM or Advanced WAF or whatever F5 is calling it today, or App Protect, all these names. But anyways, what you should be seeing is basically a rejected screen. Hey, we know what you're doing here. You got a script tag where it's not supposed to be. We're rejecting your request. Here's your support ID if you want to go back to maybe the ops team or the security team to figure this out for you. And just to verify things are working, I'm just going to click on this bookmark again without the script thing. And I'm actually going to log in again. Again, typing in the password I love F5, and what I should see is it's working. So it's only blocking malicious traffic, or what it can clearly see as malicious. You're putting a script tag on your URL argument. I mean, it's not supposed to be there. So, hooray! It's blocking traffic, which is pretty awesome. And then kind of scrolling down, going back to this idea of telemetry, Another way that we're collecting telemetry, at least in this use case, is we're dumping our logs to Elastic or Elasticsearch, which we're mapping out and dashboarding out using this thing called Kibana, which we're accessing right now. So it'll take a second, but if I were to go to, I think it's dashboards on the left-hand side, or I should say click on the hamburger button in the top left, and then go to dashboard, and then click on overview. So the overview dashboard, what I should see now is basically, a single block, right, from that single blocked request that I just made a minute ago. And then, of course, all the clean requests that have just gone through that got through that front door or through that NGINX Plus proxy to the different microservices that are running inside our Kubernetes environment. So kind of cool, right? We're stopping folks at that front door before they can even really get into our cluster and do any sort of real damage. And before, of course, they can get to our microservices, which might have sensitive information or access to sensitive information on them. So I think that's kind of cool. But if I refresh this, I think this is close to real time. Let me do this. Let me try to. You can make this anything, by the way. I think it's keying off of script and, of course, anything else that looks slightly malicious. If I refresh this, right, what I should see is it hasn't popped up yet, so it hasn't gotten the data yet. There we go. So 2. So clearly working. Maybe proof that the demo is actually doing what it's supposed to. But whole point I want to make here is, like, I look at these dashboards, right, and I look at this data, and I do think, telemetry and the gathering of telemetry is going to be an important component of how organizations operationalize, especially their load balancing or the proxy components looking into the future. So to have this ability to send telemetry to third-party locations very easily like this is a key feature. So we're good. So it talks about going through the metrics. If you want to go back to Grafana, you can. I don't know if I'm going to spend a whole lot of time here, but same idea, right? We're just validating that this is working, that we're getting telemetry data or traffic data from our NGINX Plus proxy. And then one final thing I kind of want to show here before we go into the next section, which is the API gateway. We have about 30 minutes left. Is I kind of skipped this, but one of the things you might be asking yourself is, how is this configured? You've shown the ingress piece earlier, but how do we link kind of that policy, that blocking policy, or that security policy, or that WAF policy to the ingress proxy layer that we had just shown and configured a couple moments ago or a couple minutes ago? And the way that works is, very similar to what we had shown earlier. You have your traditional ingress object, right? But in addition to that, we have this annotation here. And annotations are kind of like, I'll call them additional configurations that the ingress proxy or the ingress controller can use to perform additional configurations that might not be standard for a traditional ingress controller. Like, let's say we're using F5 in this case. F5 may not be able to understand these annotations. It may be. I don't know if they've added that feature. I don't think they have. But inside of that annotation, what we see is really 2 different kind of variables or parameters that we're sending to our ingress controller or to this NGINX Plus proxy. The first one is the name of that policy that we want applied to this ingress. And the second one is just to enable it. So that's where we're actually referencing a policy. And the way that policy is created, like everything else in Kubernetes, is through its own manifest, where in its own custom kind called AP policy. So this is a CRD for our advanced Kubernetes folks, where we have a spec that basically describes, hey, how does this work? What type of blocking do you want it in? What type of enforcement mode do you want it in? Do you want to enable data masking or whatever that's called inside of your WAF? But that's where we're actually customizing this WAF policy. We're actually specifying the level of security that we need, and we're defining, hey, how do you want this enforced? So just wanted to connect 2 and 2 together in case people are confused. This is where the magic happens. This is how it works.
Yeah, well, Tyler, I appreciate you sharing that too, because it's nice to know, on one hand, you could say, hey, I applied a WAF policy, but then on the other, it's like, all right, what does the policy do? Like, where is this thing? And I mean, you can tell by everything you've shown there that it's in blocking mode, so some people may want to put it in more of a transparent mode, or hey, let me just kind of look at stuff for a minute, not block on it. You could do all that, right?
Exactly. And the other thing I'll say just about these manifests and the parameters that I'm feeding into them is this is all well documented on the NGINX website. So another thing I know we've talked about in the past, if you've watched the Ansible webcast we did a couple months back, I think even the Terraform one, is the importance of documentation, especially for open source solutions. And I think one of the things, and I should have included it, but one of the wonderful things I think they did for this NGINX proxy, NGINX Plus proxy solution, is these resources, these declarations, what I'm creating here, all those parameters are documented. So if you ever get confused on how this works, there's documentation around those parameters. There you go. Take a look at that. So good feature to have. Just overall, it's just documentation. It's amazing how many people forget that.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So we have a little bit of time. We have about 24 minutes till the end of the hour. So what I'm going to do is I think I can go through one more module, and that's around the API gateway. And that's the section we see right here. So you can just click on NGINX Plus as an API gateway, or just click that next button, which I did off screen. You weren't able to see that. But that's what we're going to talk about just for the next couple minutes before we close this out, and we'll go through the process of configuring this API gateway for our environment. But back to the kind of the question of why, what is an API gateway and why do I need one? And it's almost strange to me because I for me in my own IT journey, going back kind of 8 years ago, I remember we were using API gateways back then, and I think it was more of a rare thing, but now I think it's becoming more of kind of an everyday use case in every organization I think I've talked to. But the whole point of an API gateway is, again, it's another proxy, which is why we're using NGINX, that kind of is about managing the routing and kind of publishing of APIs throughout your organization. Those APIs can be hosted anywhere. They could be inside of Kubernetes. They could be on WebLogic, like my organization back in the day. They can be, in Amazon ECS. It doesn't matter. But the whole point of an API gateway is to provide a single location, kind of a single proxy that all of your applications can point to in order to communicate to other APIs that may exist within your environment. Kind of think of it like a hub. It's a hub of accessing different APIs. And the reason why I think API gateways are one of the reasons why API gateways are so important is, let's say over the years, just as an example, you might be changing the location of those APIs. You may even be changing the domain name of those APIs and where they live for various reasons. And one of the things that an API gateway gives you is because it is that centralized hub, because it is that centralized location that your different applications and users can communicate to. Hopefully that location will never change or very rarely change, and it can handle the back-end routing necessary to talk to whatever that changed location is from an API standpoint. But I would say, in addition to kind of that basic routing, which I think for us, at least at Worldwide, that's what we used our API gateway for primarily. Things like standardizing on authentication. So maybe your organization is looking to standardize on using like JOT tokens to get a level of zero trust in your API communication, or maybe you're using like mutual TLS or even OpenID Connect. These are becoming different authentication standards that I think a lot of organizations are using to get kind of a further level of authentication or trust between their different services, and really ensure that, service A is truly service A and it should be able to talk to service B, vice versa. And in addition to that, things like rate limiting. You don't want people hammering your APIs, and I have ran into issues with that in my IT days. It does happen. It's often not malicious. Funny enough, it's mostly internal folks who don't know what they're doing, to be honest. And things like monitoring too, just on top of that. So again, my whole point with an API gateway again is, I think a lot of organizations hopefully have gotten to the point where they've adopted some type of API gateway, but there is a lot of value to have that there if you don't have, especially if you're going down the path of microservices, where the amount of APIs and amount of services that you have to manage and the routing to those services becomes incredibly important and critical to kind of the success of your applications as a whole, at least in my opinion. So there's my rant on the API gateway.
Can I add one clarification on that?
Yeah.
With NGINX, particularly with controller, the way you manage your APIs allows you to distribute that gateway to where your services are. So you don't necessarily have to have it centralized, like a lot of vendors do have that centralized hub. And certainly from a documentation standpoint, a publication standpoint, that's true. But from the actual control aspect on the data plane, the API gateway for NGINX can be distributed where your services are. And so, the control of that is from, NGINX controller, but that can be pushed down all the way down into your microservices across the board. So if you have 2 or 3 services within a cluster or whatever, and there's no need for that control to leave the cluster, it can stay there. And so, that obvious security benefits, but also operational efficiency benefits as well, so that you don't have to send that traffic all the way out to a cloud or anywhere else to then just come right back into the same cluster.
No, that's a fantastic point. We'll show that in just a couple minutes too. Thanks for bringing that, but we'll show that in a couple minutes when we work with the controller. No, that's an awesome point, and I'll be sure to try to highlight that. So we have 19 minutes, and I'm going to try not to go over, guys. I promise. I'm not going to do it this time. But what we're going to want to do is we're actually going to go through the process of deploying the API gateway in almost like a distributed form on one of the nodes within our environment. And to Jason's point, the way that we're deploying this agent, which is going to kind of facilitate our ability to manage our API gateway, the way that we're deploying that can be managed through a centralized controller. And we'll show that in just a moment. But to the point of being distributed, we can install this agent anywhere. In this case, it's in a lab environment, but if you want to install an AWS, Azure, I don't want to say a Raspberry Pi because I don't know if those binaries are there, but you can get very creative on where you put that API gateway. I'll say that. I'd be shocked
if NGINX is not down on a Raspberry Pi by now.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if there aren't ARM binaries out there. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to take a shortcut here, which is good for us because we have 18 minutes left. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Ansible to install the NGINX plus controller agent on our API gateway, so we can use the controller to manage the host that's hosting the agent. So what we're going to want to do is go back to our PuTTY session, our multi-tab PuTTY session, and we need to double-click on this API gateway thing on the left-hand side, so we can access our API GW or gateway site. Why can I not click on that? There we go. All right. So we're in. All right. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so the people at home can see it. So you can read it, and it doesn't look like tiny little text, and you don't have to squint and get bad eyesight because of me. There we go. All right. It's huge. All right. And I'm going to clear this out, and there we go. Next thing we want to do is I just realized I SSH in the wrong host. I need to be on my Ansible host, but not a big deal. I'm getting too excited here. All right, let me make this one bigger.
Tyler, good thing you're in MT PuTTY, multi-tab PuTTY, right?
Exactly. I'd be struggling here opening up new windows and
right.
Feel really painful. There we go. All right, I'm on my Ansible host. Now I think I'm on the right one. But what I want to do is I just want to clone down this Git repository. And this is just a list of files that we've kind of created and collected from a WWT standpoint to simplify the process of deploying NGINX Plus and the agent inside of this lab environment. So again, if you're looking for examples, this is a public repo. And we're going to clone this down. It's going to create a new folder called NGINX -lab, and I forgot this repo is kind of big, so it takes a moment or two to clone down. So give it a second. Yeah, I think there's a lot of files in there. We probably should shrink that down, but we use this across multiple different labs. That's why it's taking a while to clone, because again, there's a lot of files in there. There we go.
All right.
Yeah, not terrible. So we have this new directory called NGINX lab, which is just, again, the Git repository we've cloned down. And what we need to do is we're going to run this Ansible-playbook command targeting a playbook or a YAML file that we have to basically provision the NGINX controller agent on our API gateway node that we have here. Now, before I do that, 15 minutes left, so I think I can show this. I just want to explain very quickly what this does, because it doesn't really show that in the lab guide, but you can also look at it in your free time too. But if I cat this out, there we go. I don't know why my keys aren't processing. What I should see is really an important thing. So we're running this against basically a variable host, and this is kind of a creative way to run our playbook or target our playbook to a host that we're defining at time of execution. But what I really care about, if I scroll down, is this piece right here. And what we're doing here for the step around installing NGINX Plus on our API gateway node is we're using what's called a role. And this is an official NGINX role that we're using for installing NGINX Plus within our environment, or lab environment in this case. So if you were to look at this playbook in your own time, the thing to kind of recognize and call out here is there isn't a lot of complex logic that you have to create on your own. A lot of the logic to install NGINX Plus in your own environment is already set up for you using this NGINX role that is published online on what's called the Ansible Galaxy website. So you can certainly save yourself a lot of time if you use this role that we have here. So just calling that out. Beyond this, all we're really doing is just kind of registering this agent that we're creating to our controller. You can certainly look at that, but I just wanted to call out that role just so people are aware it's there. And if this is something you're trying to automate in your own time, it certainly saves some time if you use that role. Okay, let's actually run this thing and let's see the magic of Ansible. do its job, and hopefully it doesn't break. I know I keep saying that, but I've had bad luck on demos recently, and I am hoping that this works. It should. But the password is NGINX. You could set up a shared key if you wanted to, but we didn't in that case. And what we're seeing right now is, again, the magic of Ansible. So it's going step by step through that playbook that we just catted out a moment ago. And it's going through the process of installing NGINX Plus and getting it registered to our centralized controller within our lab environment. And it'll take a moment or two. It shouldn't take too long. But I think what's beautiful about this is that a lot of the complex logic, again, is handled by that role that we were able to use that NGINX has published out there. So,
well, and while that's completing, you can use NGINX API gateway manually. You don't have to use the controller to configure it, but configure it. The controller makes it very, very nice.
Yeah,
and really manageable across multiple. Like if you just have one instance of an API gateway and you've got a very small, mom and pop shop deployment, maybe controller doesn't make sense, but any kind of any kind of deployment beyond that, you really want the management and of that with controller.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say at scale, I would say you could get away with not using the controller, but it's one of those things I think is nice to have. So if everything's working, which it appears it is in my case, what you should see is typical what's called a play recap in Ansible, where everything was okay or changed and nothing failed out. So we're good. Cool.
Tyler, I remember that stuff from our Ansible.
That's right.
Live. That's pretty cool.
We might have spent a hot minute with YAML in that lab as well.
Yeah.
You can't get away from it.
No, you can't. So what we're going to want to do now is, so we have the agent deployed, but now what we need to do is we need to go to our controller login, which is, again, in our Chrome browser with a nice little bookmark at the top to make it easy to get to. We're just going to open this up and we're going to log into our controller. And what we're really doing here is just kind of a first step is we're validating that the agent, it was added to the controller from an infrastructure standpoint. So is the controller aware of the agent from that playbook we just ran? What is wrong with this? Oh, there we go. So to do that, all you have to do is click on an NGINX hamburger icon and click on this infrastructure button right here and go to, where do I go to here? Oh, it's right here. Just can't read. Let me make this a little bit bigger. But what we should see is basically that API gateway node where we had just deployed that agent a second ago. And if you look at this IP address and do like an IP adder or ifconfig on that Ubuntu host that is running this agent on top of it, you should see the same IP address. It even tells us our hypervisor. Ain't that neat? I didn't recognize it did that. But it says it's in running state, so we're good. Now what we need to do is we need to basically configure this gateway to take traffic and run it through it. So act as that proxy layer for our different APIs feeding into different locations. And to do that, we go back to the hamburger, the NGINX hamburger, and we're going to go to services right here. And what we want to do is navigate to this kind of gate icon with the title of gateways, which is kind of cool. I like nice little icons like that. And what we want to do is we want to create a new gateway. So again, want to create that I'm not going to reuse front door, but recreate kind of that new gateway object that's really our API gateway that's going to feed into our APIs that we have deployed, at least in Kubernetes in our case. And I'm just going to copy and paste these different values in here. These are just names that we're going to give this, and then in an environment. So we do things in production here. We don't believe in dev and test. We go straight to prod, and that's what we're going to use here. And I think we're good. I might miss a step here. I'm kind of nervous, but I think we're good. I'm nervous I'm going to miss a step, I think.
Tyler, don't be nervous. You're the guy that goes straight to production. So
it's true. Have some confidence.
Right. It's like the old saying, I don't always test, but when I do it in production. So.
Exactly. And for this placement in sent refs, we're going to do API gateway. Trying to remember what that does. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then our host name, right? So what's the host name? What's the URI that we want this API gateway to listen on? What do we want our applications to point to from an API gateway standpoint? This case is creatively named api.arcadiafinance.lab.local. And we'll hit done there. And we're not doing any security stuff. You could add a certificate if you want to. This is production, but we don't believe in security, so we're going to.
I was going to say, Tyler, you're going straight to prod, no security. You are living right on the edge, my friend.
All gas, no brakes. That's how we roll. That's how we roll here. And what you're doing here is you're basically selecting the HTTP methods you want this gateway to support. We want to support all of them. Why not?
Sure.
But you could be very specific there and say, hey, I only want to support like GET requests, and that might be nice if you have like a read-only type of API. Yep. And I'm going to click next there, and I don't think there's any advanced stuff we have to add. Nope, I don't think so. But there's advanced options if you want to look at that. I'm just going to click submit. Cool. I just realized we skipped a step, but don't worry about it. It's fine. There was a screen that was supposed to pop up there, but clicking submit is just fine. We'll see it in just a second with the next thing that we have to create.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a point there. But also under services, click on apps. So that's where we're going to go next. And this is so now that we've created our gateway, what we're creating next is basically the mapping to our specific application API, or the API that we have living in Kubernetes right now. So that's what we're creating right now. It's just kind of that object that maps back to it. So I'm just going to, again, paste in this content.
It feels a little recursive, but you could, do all this via API, so you don't have to use the GUI, right?
You're stealing my surprises.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. So to your point, there we go, right there.
Yep.
So
beautiful.
No, Jason, you're absolutely right, and perfect timing, by the way. So one of the things I absolutely love about the controller is, and one of the cool things it does is every step of this process, I just happened to skip over the last one, but every step of this process, it will give you the API call that you need to make in order to perform the same configuration using Postman or curl or even Ansible. So I love this sort of stuff because it saves a lot of time in trying to kind of reverse engineer the API. I would say for things that don't do stuff like this, sometimes you have to do again, right click, inspect, look at the API calls. But the fact it puts this in front of you is awesome. I think that's wonderful. But to that point, I think we have everything configured here. I hope so. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah,
totally unrelated plug with documenting APIs and stuff. The Python Fast API framework. I don't know if you've messed with that yet, but it's completely self-documenting, so you don't have to do your doc strings or anything. When you define your endpoints, you can go to it in the app browser, and it'll tell you exactly what the methods are. It's awesome.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in just a second with OpenAPI or Swagger and how you can use that in this case.
Yeah.
API documentation. But in the meantime, we're going to click on APIs here. And what we're going to do here is actually map out the API endpoints and the parameters that they're going to take. So the API gateway kind of understands kind of the language that your API it needs to speak in order for the data that it's taking in. That makes sense. But I'm going to click Create API Definition here. And what we're going to do is I have to scroll over here is, again, copying and pasting this data here. It's really just metadata. We're just giving it a name. You could probably name it something better if you wanted to. Another cool thing is you can multi-version these APIs. So you can have multiple different versions and point your gateway at different versions as you make changes. That's a very common feature for API gateways. And then what we care about, what's important, and back to Jason's point, is how would you like to describe this API? And in this case, it's using the Open API specification, or what was previously known as I just said it, Swagger. Yeah, I'm losing my mind. But what was previously known as Swagger. And what this is, for the folks who are unfamiliar with Swagger or OpenAPI being the newer name for it, this is basically a standardized format in communicating documentation for APIs. So I'm opening it up right here. But what we're looking at, more YAML, but what we're looking at here is just a means of documenting the different endpoints that we have for our API and the different parameters it can take in. And what's really cool about Swagger is this is an incredibly widely adopted standard. Jason mentioned Fast API. Fast API will create this documentation largely for you. Yep. But outside of that, I looking back to my IT days, we used Swagger documentation for pretty much all of the APIs or all of the microservices we have published throughout our organization. Developers use this. A lot of people use this. So this isn't a one-off thing. That's the point I'm trying to get at. A lot of people use Swagger. So what's cool about NGINX Plus API Gateway is I can use this Swagger file as kind of like a point of reference for how my API should take in traffic, and for how this API definition is being defined. And if I click Next, what I should see, and it's kind of blown up, so it's hard for me to read it. But what you should see is those different API endpoints and the request methods they're going to take when they pass through the API gateway. So I'll click Next, and then what I should see now, again, hard to read, is back to this idea of every single step of this process. It gives you the payload that you can send programmatically to the NGINX Plus controller API if you wanted to automate this or if you wanted to tweak something. So, in my opinion, this is pretty cool, right? If it gives you some options from an automation standpoint. But I'm going to click Submit. And I know, guys, I'm watching the clock. You can give me a hard time about it later.
You're fine.
It's all right.
But we've added that API. We have our API definition. The API gateway is aware of our endpoints. We kind of skipped some steps there, but we went through those. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to publish this API. Go away. There we go. But we're gonna. How did I do that? I can just do that. Add published API. Cool. So I'm gonna. How did I do that earlier? I thought I selected that. Huh. It's bringing it up. That's fine. Not a big deal. So for me, it's popping up. I'm just going to click this Add Published API button right here, and I think it does the same exact thing. And what I'm going to want to do, or is that the same thing? Am I clicking on the right thing? Or am I going crazy? What? I thought I had that right.
There is if you click out of there, there's an Add Published API up a little bit. It's kind of grayed out, though.
Yeah, it was letting me select that. I'm curious why it's not letting me do that anymore.
Might just be because of screen size or something. Sometimes the CSS behind that gets a little weird.
Yeah, I don't know. That's fine. I don't know what's going on. But what we're going to do is kind of follow this. Hopefully you're able to click that button. I think we're fine here. I'm just confused as to why that's not working. We're going to paste in the content again that's being dictated inside of our page. And give it our name and production API. All this metadata is important outside of the path. And we'll click next at the bottom and then give it some more metadata. So I'm doing this manually right now. But again, this can all be automated. And going back to this agility presentation that we're going to do in Agility Lab, we're going to be talking a lot about how you automate this process. So for me, I will look at this and be like, this kind of stinks. This is a pain. But I'll be honest with you, like once you automate this, it isn't too bad. But what we're doing here, again, is just mapping to our environment. We're mapping to our application that we had created earlier, and then mapping to the gateway API object that we'd also created earlier. So what's our gateway? What application is this for? And then which environment is it for? Which in this case is production, because we do things live here. So there you go. So once we have that, now we need to set up basically the routing rules for this. And I think this is the final piece we have to configure in order to get this working. But what we're going to want to do is basically what you have is two different sections to this page. We have an unrouted section and then kind of a component section. And what we need to do is basically dictate, hey, for these API endpoints, these unrouted API endpoints, where do we want to send them from a proxy standpoint? Which work group do we want to send them to? And that's what we're configuring here. So workload group, that's what it's called. But so what we're going to want to do is a lot of copy and paste again. Apologies again for all the copy and paste. I should have created an Ansible playbook around this. That would have saved us a lot of time. But I'm like, I'll show the steps.
In YAML, by the way, Tyler.
In YAML. But again, a lot of copy and paste. In fact, if you want a challenge for the folks who are watching this, create a playbook around this process. You'll learn a lot about Ansible that way. And I think that's everything. So click next. You can add logging settings here if you want to. Our workload group name. And then most importantly, what's the workload URI? So when we get these API endpoints from a gateway standpoint, where do we want to send it? And this is basically our one of the microservices we had deployed inside of our Kubernetes environment or Kubernetes cluster. So there you go. And we'll just keep clicking next. Health monitoring. We don't believe in health monitoring here, even though we're in production, but you could add it if you wanted to. And URI rewrites, I don't think we're doing anything like that. No. And then rate limiting. So we do, for some weird reason, we believe in rate limiting here. I don't know why, but we do. Yeah, we're doing it based on client IP. So you can't hammer our API through the API gateway. In this case, it's 1 request per second, which is pretty strict, but hey, it's just production after all.
We're strict, right? I mean, we've got standards, right, Tyler?
Yeah, exactly.
It's production.
And then just kind of going through this, if you wanted to add authentication, you can certainly do that. Add JOT authentication, easy enough. And then, just some additional advanced values like max body size, like maybe you want to restrict the size of the JSON body. There you go. And then finally, our very exciting JSON payload that you can send in an automated fashion to your NGINX controller API endpoint. So I'm hoping I didn't miss a step there. I don't think I did. We'll find out. But one final thing we're going to do before we test this thing is my favorite part, dragging and dropping these little API endpoints from the left-hand side that are unrouted to our component on the right-hand side, which is what I'm doing right here. Isn't this cool? And drag and drop. I don't know. So it's the little things. It's the little things that impress me.
Everybody loves a good drag and drop, you know?
But I'll click next. Oh, look at that. You got more API calls that you can send to this NGINX controller to do your configuration. So again, it tells you exactly what it's doing, which is really cool. And then I'm going to click submit. And behind the scenes... Sorry. No, you can go.
I was just saying, to your point, yeah, it's laborious, no doubt, to go through all that stuff. But as a technician and all that, I want to understand what all that stuff is first. And then when I understand the things that I do care about and the things I don't care about, then you automate the boring stuff, right? But I still like to know, rather than taking somebody's template that, oh, hey, I've got this Ansible playbook, or I've got, whatever, I've got this automation script. Okay, that's great. But just looking at your text, I don't necessarily understand what all that stuff's doing, but going through, and learning the process and learning what all those things do first, just gives me a confidence level of, yes, this is what I want it to do, instead of what somebody else is telling me I should do.
Exactly. No, and you look at this process, right? And I think to a certain extent encourages you to automate. But to your point, I think most folks have a lot more trust in automation they build versus I'm just going to take your script and run with it, or
right,
unless you tweak it a little bit. But
I wish that was true. Based upon some of the stuff I've seen, I don't know that is true.
But one final thing here, and then we'll test this out. So what's happening behind the scenes is basically it's going to that agent that is managing our API gateway and configuring the controller's configuring our API gateway on our API gateway host. A lot of APIs there. But it looks like we're working here, and what you're looking for is just a green checkbox here. And if everything is working, fingers crossed, the way that we're going to test this is through one of my favorite tools, probably still to today or this day, is this thing called Postman. And for folks who don't know, Postman is just a very simple tool to test API endpoints. If you're not familiar with Postman, check it out because it's pretty cool what you can do with it. But what I want to do is on the left-hand side, you'll see this Arcadia API collection. And this is just a collection of API calls that we can send. We're going to test a couple of these different API calls that's given to us. So it first wants us to test last transactions. And we get a response. It's not in JSON, which is kind of crummy, but it at least tells us that our API gateway is properly proxying traffic. Yes, it is. And then to kind of test out the actual functionality of our application, what we can do is go to this post buy stocks. And what we're doing here is we're just sending a request to buy stocks, or buy amount of F5 stock, I should say, using this finance application. So I'll make this like 16. We'll hit a post. We'll hit send for this post. And what we should see, if everything is working, is a success message there with kind of a response as to what just happened. Mm-hmm. But one final thing just before I kind of close this out and talk about next steps here. If you want to validate that this is working, that the API calls truly went through and they're being processed, you can bring that Arcadia finance application back up, log in with Matt, and of course, I love F5. There you go. Set it a third or fourth time there. And what you should see is, where is it? But somewhere on this page, it'll actually tell
right
you.
There, under your last transactions.
Yeah, there you go. I was looking at that. I'm like, is that right? I guess it is. So it actually, yeah, there's a date. So yeah, 4/6/2021. But there's our transaction right there from us buying the stock. So we know that the API is processing at least our post request successfully. And there's some additional calls here that it documents that you can walk through. Now, I know we're a bit out of time, but kind of next steps here, and what I would recommend folks that are going through this lab to do next is we have one more section to this lab. And this is around applying kind of that NGINX app protector, that kind of that WAF layer to the API gateway. So very similar to what we did earlier. Maybe you want to protect our API from malicious attacks or from people stuffing kind of malicious data into their JSON, trying to break our application. How would you do that? And what this section goes through is basically step-by-step setting up NGINX App Protect on that local host, that's the API gateway host that has the NGINX agent on top of it, and then the process of configuring the actual policy that's applied to block that malicious traffic when it's needed. So I know we're, again, low on time. Apologies that we're over, guys, but this is the next step. And then I guess one final thing I'll just kind of call out to is, just a reminder, Agility is in 2 weeks, folks. So what did I say earlier? You must attend. But no, in all seriousness, if you have the time, at least for me, I think Agility compared to other conferences in the industry is actually a fairly good one. It's more engineering focused versus sales focused, which a lot of conferences are, which drives me nuts to be honest about it. But I know F5 has a ton of labs that they're going to provide, but if you're looking for kind of a good next step here and something to look at, just as, okay, I know a little bit about NGINX, but what can I do more with this? Or how can I truly operationalize and automate the process of managing NGINX Plus? Take a look at our API security lab with NGINX Plus using GitOps. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about what GitOps is and how you can apply those practices to managing NGINX. And then, of course, our F5 201 certification lab. Check that out, too. I'm sure that'll be great also. So, no, but Jason and John, no, I appreciate the time. Apologies, we went a little bit over, but I'm hoping the content was worth the time.
Absolutely, that was awesome to go through, and I think too. You think about security from a standpoint of you're defining your API gateway, and you think oh well, I've locked down the access points, so therefore I am secure, and to a certain extent you've reduced the threat landscape, right? But there's still a threat. Right. And so that's where you add the app protect on top of that to say, okay, the doors I still have, the holes I've punched in the boat, I still need to patch those and make sure that the water's not flowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a great point. Well, Tyler, this has been amazing, man. I really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your willingness to share all the greatness of, NGINX and K8s and, kube cuddle, kube control. We still don't know what it is.
But nobody will ever know.
Hates, right?
It's almost like how many licks does it get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? World will never know. They'll never know what it is.
That owl, man. I think it was 2 or 3, and then he just bit the thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, you never know. Awesome, man. Well, Tyler, we'll do it again sometime, man. These are awesome to do. So I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Tyler.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate
Thanks for joining us.
All right, man. Well, Jason, It's been another great time, man. This is awesome to do live labs. And yeah, just want to say thanks to everybody that stuck with us today and those that would watch this after. It's been a lot of fun today.
Yep. And so, yeah, we'll see you back Thursday at our normal time for DevCentral Connects, 12:30 Pacific. Oh, wow. What happened with my voice there? 12:30 Pacific? Like 47 and still going through puberty. Holy cow.
That's right.
So, yeah. Anyway, we will see you guys Thursday, 12:30 Pacific. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks a lot.